My parents never saw me as their daughter, they only ever viewed me as their sophisticated backup plan for wealth. The night they threw me out of our family home with nothing but a single suitcase and the clothes on my back, I had exactly $2,847 in my bank account and absolutely nowhere to go. I'm Maya Foster, 28 years old, and what happened 3 weeks ago changed the trajectory of my life forever. I inherited something that shifted the balance of power in our family, my grandfather's $1.2 billion fortune. But when my parents cornered me and demanded that I sign every single cent over to them for safekeeping, I did the unthinkable. I refused. What happened next exposed 15 years of dark, twisted secrets that would systematically destroy them in front of every person who actually mattered in Manhattan society. If you're watching this, please take a moment to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. This is a story about how the person you least expect can hold the power to bring an empire to its knees. It all began 3 weeks ago when my grandfather's personal lawyer called me with news that was destined to tear my family apart. Sterling Holdings wasn't just a standard real estate company, it was a massive, sprawling empire. We're talking about $5 billion in commercial real estate spread across the most iconic streets of Manhattan, with properties that literally defined the New York City skyline. My grandfather, William Sterling, had built this entire legacy from absolutely nothing. He started with a single, crumbling brownstone in Brooklyn back in 1975, working 3 jobs just to make the mortgage payments. For 15 years, my father, Robert Foster, had served as the chief financial officer. To the outside world, Robert was the quintessential executive. He had a Harvard MBA, was a prominent member of 3 exclusive country clubs, and was constantly photographed at high-end charity galas with my mother, Patricia Foster, elegantly draped on his arm. But behind the closed doors of our townhouse, the mask would slip. My father would slide complex legal contracts across the dinner table between courses of steak and wine, telling me that family always comes first, while his cold, calculating eyes were busy counting percentages and dividends. I didn't join the family business right away. Instead, I worked my way up as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, a high-pressure job I'd earned entirely on my own merit despite my parents' constant, suffocating insistence that I should just come home and work under them. They never understood why I needed to forge my own path. Or perhaps, deep down, they understood exactly why I was running, and that's precisely why they hated my independence so much. Grandpa William was different. He was the only one who truly saw me. Every Sunday afternoon, without fail, he'd invite me to his sprawling penthouse for a game of chess and a rare, honest conversation. Maya, he'd say to me while moving his knight across the mahogany board, you have to remember that integrity isn't just about the massive, life-altering decisions. It's actually about the 1,000 tiny, seemingly insignificant choices that define who you truly are when you think no one is watching. Back in 2019, my father had tried to pressure me into signing a mountain of papers for what he called an unmissable investment opportunity in the Cayman Islands. The documents were intentionally vague, filled with dense legal jargon designed to confuse and overwhelm anyone without a law degree. When I stood my ground and refused to sign, my father didn't speak a single word to me for 3 consecutive months. My mother was even worse. She called me ungrateful, selfish, and accused me of being the one who was breaking the family apart. But Grandpa William noticed. He always noticed. And while my parents arrogantly thought they were playing a sophisticated long game, William Sterling was playing an even longer and much more dangerous one. None of us, not my father, not my mother, and certainly not me, knew just how much he'd been watching, documenting, and meticulously preparing for the day he was no longer here to protect the company. The 2024 New Year's Eve party changed everything, though I was completely oblivious to the shift at the time. While my parents were busy networking with Manhattan's elite power brokers in the glittering ballroom below, Grandpa pulled me aside into the quiet of his private study. I noticed his hands were trembling slightly as he handed me a small, metallic USB drive that was both encrypted and password protected. When the time comes, Maya, you'll know exactly what to do with this, he told me, his voice much lower and more serious than I had ever heard it. The password is your grandmother's birthday followed by our wedding anniversary date. Whatever you do, do not let anyone, especially your parents, know that you have this in your possession. I slipped the drive into my evening purse, feeling a surge of confusion but trusting him with my entire soul. "Grandpa, is everything okay?" "You're scaring me a little," I whispered. He just smiled at me, a sad look that never quite reached his eyes, and said, "Everything will be exactly as it should be, my dear. Just remember the chess board." The months that followed felt like a high-stakes chess match I was playing in the dark. My mother began asking increasingly intrusive questions about my Goldman Sachs bonuses, my personal savings account, and whether I'd considered better investment strategies through the family's private channels. She'd mentioned certain family friends who had made immense fortunes through creative financing, giving me a knowing, greasy look that made my skin crawl with discomfort. Then, in June of 2024, my father presented me with another opportunity. It was a family project that required my signature as a board member of a subsidiary company I didn't even know existed until that very moment. The paperwork was inches thick, a wall of text meant to be deliberately overwhelming. When I calmly asked for a week to review the details with my own private lawyer, my father's face turned a violent shade of red. "We are your parents, Maya. We are your family. We don't need lawyers standing between us and our daughter," he shouted. But I held firm. I had learned my lesson back in 2019. I wasn't going to be a blind signatory for whatever scheme they were cooking up. The project ended up proceeding without my involvement, and the atmosphere at our Sunday family dinners grew arctic. My mother would spend the entire meal making passive-aggressive comments about ungrateful children who had forgotten the hands that fed them. My father would conduct loud business calls about succession planning right in front of me, making sure I heard every biting word about the importance of loyalty and traditional family values. What none of us knew was that Grandpa William had already seen everything he needed to see. He had spent his entire life becoming a legend in New York real estate, but not for the cutthroat reasons people assumed. While his competitors built their fortunes on massive leverage and dancing in legal gray areas, Grandpa built his reputation on simple handshakes and kept promises. "Integrity is non-negotiable," he'd tell any young intern who would listen, and he meant it to his core. He had started with nothing, a young man from Queens with nothing but a high school diploma and a work ethic that could literally move mountains. He had saved for 5 long years, working 3 grueling jobs, just to buy that first brownstone. By 1990, he owned 50 properties. By the year 2000, Sterling Holdings was valued at $1 billion. By 2020, it was $5 billion. But that astronomical success hadn't softened his edges. If anything, it had sharpened his eye for deception. In 2022, during a routine board meeting, Grandpa had noticed several small discrepancies in the financial reports. They were tiny things at first, a consulting fee here that seemed high, a management expense there that didn't quite line up with the property's performance. They were patterns that only someone who had personally laid every brick of the empire would ever recognize. He didn't confront my parents then. Instead, he quietly hired an independent auditor, paying for their services out of his own personal account so it wouldn't show up on the company books. The preliminary findings he received were so troubling that he began preparing, not just for his death, but for a legal war. Every document, every legal provision, and every ironclad safeguard was put in place with the terrifying precision of a grandmaster. On September 15, 2025, the world lost William Sterling. He died of a massive heart attack in his sleep at the age of 82. He had just closed a $200 million acquisition only the week before and seemed to be in perfect health during our very last Sunday chess game. The funeral was a massive affair held 3 days later at St. Patrick's Cathedral. The mayor of New York spoke. The governor sent his deepest condolences. Even the Wall Street Journal ran a full front-page tribute to his legacy. But while the city mourned the loss of a titan, my parents were already mentally dividing up the spoils of his empire. They had absolutely no idea that Grandpa had already made his final move from beyond the grave. The funeral reception at the penthouse hadn't even concluded when I accidentally overheard my parents in the coat room. Their voices were low, hushed with a sense of urgent greed. My mother was already on the phone with Christie's auction house, discussing the liquidation of Grandpa's legendary art collection. We're talking about Monets, Basquiat's, and Warhol's, pieces that were worth hundreds of millions on their own. "We need to move fast, Robert," she whispered frantically, We need to sell these before the estate tax people or anyone else starts asking too many questions. Meanwhile, my father had pulled 3 key board members aside near the bar, their heads huddled together like common conspirators. I caught fragments of their conversation: smooth transition, maintaining total family control, and leadership continuity. My father had even gone so far as to have new business cards printed that listed him as the CEO, even though Grandpa's body hadn't even been in the ground for 2 hours. When I approached them to say I was heading home, my mother gripped my arm with a force that left a bruise. "Remember, Maya, we must present a completely united front to the world. Do not speak to any lawyers, any board members, or any outsiders without consulting us first. And you are strictly forbidden from making any statements to the press." "About what, Mom?" I asked, my voice trembling. My father gave me a look so sharp it could have drawn blood. "About anything. The less you say, the better it is for everyone involved. You wouldn't want to create any unnecessary complications for the Sterling name, would you?" That very night, they called an emergency family meeting at their Upper East Side townhouse. They claimed the agenda was about protecting Grandpa's legacy, but when I walked through the door, I found a team of high-priced estate lawyers already there, with documents spread across the dining table like battle plans for an invasion. "We need to be strategic and decisive," my father announced, looking like he was already king. "The formal will reading is in 2 days. No matter what that document says, we must maintain absolute family control over Sterling Holdings. Maya, you will be expected to support every decision we make, for the good of the company and the 1,000 families who work for us." The lawyers all nodded in unison, clearly having been well compensated for their loyalty to my father's narrative. But I noticed something in their eyes, a flicker of unease, as if they knew a storm was coming that they couldn't stop. One lawyer kept checking his watch every few minutes, as if he were counting down the seconds to an explosion. 2 days. September 20th. That was the date of the will reading that would change the Sterling family forever. Marcus Coleman's law office occupied the entire 47th floor of a prestigious Madison Avenue high-rise. On September 20th, at exactly 2 p.m. sharp, we gathered. My parents had arrived 15 minutes early, flanked by their own massive legal team from Patterson and Associates, with briefcases open and ready for a long, drawn-out legal war. Marcus, a distinguished man in his mid-40s with kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, welcomed us into the grand conference room. The view was breathtaking, stretching across Central Park just as the autumn colors were beginning to turn. It had always been Grandpa's favorite season. "Before we begin the formal reading," Marcus said, settling into his leather chair with a sense of gravity, "I need to confirm that every person present is legally entitled to hear these proceedings. Mr. and Mrs. Foster, and Miss Maya Foster, you are all specifically named in the final document." My father leaned forward, his arrogance radiating off him. "Let's just skip the boring formalities, Marcus. We all know that William left the stewardship of the company in the hands of the family members who actually know how to run it." Marcus didn't flinch. He simply opened a thick leather folder, revealing a document that was much more substantial than any of us had expected. The last will and testament of William James Sterling, executed on August 1, 2025, superseding and nullifying all previous versions, Marcus began. My mother's lawyer immediately started a recording on his phone. Marcus continued in a clear, unwavering voice. "To my son-in-law, Robert Foster, and my daughter-in-law, Patricia Foster, I leave the sum of exactly $1 each. I do this having already provided for them generously during my lifetime through their exorbitant salaries, bonuses, and benefits at Sterling Holdings." The room went deathly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that plush carpet. My father's face went from its usual tan to a deep, alarming shade of crimson. Marcus didn't pause. "To my only granddaughter, Maya Elizabeth Foster, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. This includes all majority shares of Sterling Holdings, all commercial and residential real estate properties, all private investment accounts, and all my personal possessions. The current estimated valuation of this inheritance is approximately $1.2 billion. This is a joke. This is a mistake," my father roared, slamming his hand onto the glass table so hard it vibrated. Check the signatures. Check the date. There is no way William was in his right mind. Marcus calmly turned the page. There is, however, one very specific condition. Clause 7.3 of the will requires a complete, independent forensic audit of Sterling Holdings to be completed within 30 days of my death. Only upon the successful and clean completion of this audit does the formal inheritance transfer to Maya Foster become final. My mother stood up, her voice screeching with desperation. We will contest this. He was senile. He wasn't of sound mind when he signed this. Marcus looked at her with a chillingly professional smile and replied, the will includes a comprehensive psychological evaluation from Mount Sinai Hospital, conducted and dated July 28, 2025. It confirms Mr. Sterling was in perfect mental health. He anticipated your concerns quite clearly. The ride back to my parents' townhouse was a suffocating experience. The only sound was the furious, rhythmic tapping of my mother's fingers on her phone as she texted her high society friends, beginning the damage control in real time. My father drove like a man possessed, attacking the road, taking sharp corners at dangerous speeds, and honking at every pedestrian in his path. The second we stepped through the front door, the explosion happened. How long have you been planning this, Maya? My father screamed, his voice echoing off the marble foyer. How long have you been poisoning his mind against us? How many years did you spend manipulative that dying old man during those little chess games? I stood there, stunned but strangely calm. I didn't even know about the will, Dad. I had no idea. My mother threw her designer purse onto the couch and pointed a finger at me. Liar. You were always the perfect one, the quiet one, while we were out there actually making the money that paid for your life. All those Sunday visits, you played him like a fiddle. They were already prepared for a counterattack. On the dining room table sat a fresh stack of legal documents, powers of attorney, asset transfer agreements, and the formation of a family trust. Everything had been pre-dated and was simply waiting for my signature. Sign these papers right now, Maya, my father commanded, his voice trembling with rage. Transfer everything into this family trust. We will manage the assets properly, the way William would have actually wanted if he'd been thinking straight. You have zero experience running $1 billion international corporation. You're only 28 years old, for God's sake. You analyze spreadsheets at Goldman Sachs. This is light years beyond your capabilities. Think about the employees, Maya. Thousands of families depend on the stability of Sterling Holdings. You would destroy their entire livelihoods with your utter inexperience and ego. I picked up the first document and scanned it. It was designed to give them total, unchecked control, leaving me as a beneficiary in name only. I would have no voting rights, no access to the inheritance funds, and no say in company policy without their explicit written approval. I need time to think about this, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. My father's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. You have until exactly 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. After that, we will have no choice but to take legal action to protect the company from your sheer selfishness. At 11 p.m. that night, sitting alone in my childhood bedroom, I remembered the USB drive. My hands were shaking as I plugged it into my laptop and entered the password Grandpa had given me, my grandmother's birthday followed by their anniversary. The drive didn't just open, it revealed a massive, meticulously organized digital library. There were dozens of folders, each one clearly labeled by the year. I opened the first one from 2010. The first email I read was from my father to an offshore account manager in the Caymans. Transfer complete. Delete all digital correspondence immediately, it read. Attached was an invoice from Sterling Holdings for strategic consulting services, totaling $2.3 million. I quickly checked the name of the consulting firm. It didn't exist. It was a ghost company. I kept reading, deeper and deeper into the digital rabbit hole. 2015, my mother had authorized a $5 million marketing expense that traced directly back to a shell company in the Cayman Islands that she personally controlled. 2018, my father had diverted a $12 million luxury property into accounts registered under fake vendor names. 2020, both of my parents had signed off on phantom construction costs for a midtown project that totaled over $30 million in stolen funds. It went on for 15 years. Over 200 separate transactions, each one bearing their digital signatures, their personal approval codes, and their literal fingerprints all over the theft. The USB contained everything a prosecutor could ever dream of: bank statements, internal emails, wire transfer confirmations, and secret ledger entries. Grandpa William had documented every single cent they had stolen. The final folder on the drive was simply labeled "For Maya." Inside was a single PDF document, a letter from Grandpa written just 1 week before he passed away. "My dear Maya," it began, "if you are reading these words, you have finally discovered what I have known with a heavy heart for 3 years. Your parents have been systematically stealing from this company, from our loyal employees, and from our shareholders. I gave them every opportunity to come clean and make things right. Instead, they grew bolder and more arrogant in their crimes. The mandatory audit will reveal the truth to the world. Trust Marcus Coleman. Trust the legal process. And most importantly, Maya, trust yourself. You possess the integrity that this company desperately needs to survive. All my love, Grandpa." I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes burned with tears and exhaustion. Downstairs, I could still hear the muffled voices of my parents on a conference call, likely with their legal team, planning exactly how they were going to handle me at the board meeting the next day. I realized then that my childhood was a lie. The private schools, the Yale tuition, the summer homes, it was all paid for with money stolen from my grandfather's hard work and the pensions of his employees. My decision was made. I would not sign away Grandpa's legacy to the very people who had been robbing it blind for over a decade. Tomorrow, they would finally get their answer. At exactly 7 a.m. on September 21st, I walked into the sun-drenched breakfast room. My parents were already there, seated with 2 of their lead lawyers. There were documents spread out between the smell of expensive coffee and fresh croissants. They looked up at me expectantly, and my mother didn't even say good morning. She just extended a high-end Mont Blanc pen toward me. "I'm not signing a single page," I said. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. My father's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. My mother's practiced, society smile froze, then shattered into a mask of pure venom. "What did you just say to me?" my father asked, his voice dangerously low. I said I'm not signing. Grandpa left the company to me for a reason, and after what I've seen, I understand exactly why he did it. My mother stood up slowly, her chair screeching against the floor. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything we have sacrificed for you. The elite schools, the connections I forced for you at Goldman Sachs, you would be nothing without us. And all of it was paid for with stolen money, wasn't it, Mom?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the blood drain from their faces. My father's expression shifted from rage to a terrifying, cold blankness. "Get out," he whispered, his voice barely sounding human. "You have exactly 30 minutes to pack whatever you can carry in one suitcase. Security will be waiting to escort you off this property." "Robert, maybe we should," one of the lawyers started to interject, but my father roared at him to shut up. "She is no longer our daughter. She made her choice. She wants the empire. Let's see how she likes being homeless first." I climbed the stairs with legs that felt like lead. In my room, I grabbed the absolute essentials: my laptop, the USB drive, some basic clothes, and the one thing that truly mattered, my grandmother's pearl necklace that Grandpa had hidden away from me. As I walked out of the front door for the very last time, my mother screamed after me from the foyer, "You'll be back. When you fail, when you realize you have absolutely nothing without the foster name, you'll come crawling back on your hands and knees begging for our forgiveness." The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. I stood on the sidewalk of the Upper East Side with one suitcase, feeling truly and completely alone for the first time in my 28 years. But as I took a breath of the crisp morning air, I realized I wasn't just alone, I was finally free. Standing on that sidewalk, I didn't cry. I called Marcus Coleman. He answered on the very first ring. "They kicked you out, didn't they?" he asked. It wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. "I have nowhere to go, Marcus." Mr. Sterling anticipated this would happen the moment you stood up to them. "You are to go to his penthouse at 740 Park Avenue immediately. The doorman has already been notified of your arrival." The ride to Grandpa's building felt like a dream. This was the same route I'd taken for 1,000 Sunday chess games, but now the city looked different. The doorman, James, greeted me with a warmth that I had never received from my own parents. "Miss Foster, we have been expecting you. Mrs. Eliza is waiting for you upstairs." The private elevator opened directly into the foyer of the penthouse. Eliza Stewart, Grandpa's housekeeper and confidant for over 30 years, stood there with tears of relief in her eyes. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and home. "He told me you would come, Maya," she whispered. "He said, when Maya finally needs a sanctuary from the storm, she'll know exactly where to find it." The penthouse was exactly as I remembered it, but now it felt like a fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a majestic view of Central Park, and Grandpa's chess set was still sitting on the side table, exactly as we had left it. But Eliza led me past the memories and into his private office. "He left a final set of instructions for you," she said, opening a concealed wall safe I had never noticed before. Inside were dozens of physical files, every single one labeled with dates, names, and account numbers. They were the original, hard copy backups of everything on the USB drive, plus even more evidence Grandpa had gathered in his final months. "He began this preparation 3 years ago," Eliza explained. "Every Sunday, after you would leave, he would spend hours in here working on these files. He told me that you were the only person in this entire family he could ever trust to do the right thing when the stakes were at their highest." On top of the stack was a business card for Sarah Mitchell, a senior partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. "He said to call her the very second you were ready to fight back." I was ready. Sarah Mitchell answered her private line on the second ring. "Miss Foster, I've been waiting for this call. Mr. Sterling retained our elite forensic services 6 months ago specifically for this contingency." Within 2 hours, Sarah and 3 of her most senior auditors were seated in Grandpa's grand conference room. The retainer had already been paid, $500,000 from an escrow account Grandpa had established specifically for this audit. "We need to move with extreme speed," Sarah said, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "The 30-day clock on the wall started the day he died. That gives us until October 15th, but your father has already moved the emergency board meeting up to October 5th. He is clearly trying to vote you out and seize control before the audit can be finalized." "He's trying to hide the theft," I said. Sarah gave me a predatory, confident smile. "Let him try. My team has already done a massive amount of preliminary work based on the documents your grandfather provided us months ago. What we are finding is much, much worse than simple embezzlement. It's a systematic gutting of the company's future." By September 28th, the evidence Sarah's team had uncovered was so vast it made my initial USB discovery look like pocket change. She called me into the office, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a look of professional disgust. "Maya, this isn't just civil fraud anymore. This is high-level criminal activity." She spread the reports across the table. There were dozens of shell companies: Paradise Holdings, Sterling Sunset LLC, Foster Family International, all registered in the Caymans with my mother listed as the sole beneficiary. "Your father has signed 47 different contracts with vendors that quite literally do not exist," Sarah continued. "The addresses lead to empty parking lots in Newark and abandoned warehouses in Queens. But the payments, totaling nearly $200 million, are all very real, and all authorized personally by him. But here is the real kicker: they use the employee pension funds as collateral for their personal luxury loans. If this goes public, your parents aren't just losing their jobs, they are looking at serious federal prison time." October 5, 2025. 9 a.m. The Waldorf Astoria's Park Avenue Ballroom had been converted into a high-stakes corporate coliseum. 50 major shareholders filled the gallery, 20 board members sat at the massive horseshoe table, and 3 high-profile journalists were seated in the back, tipped off that something historic was about to happen. My father stood at the podium, looking like he'd already won the war. He was wearing his lucky Hermes tie and radiating an aura of untouchable power. My mother sat in the front row, a vision of confidence in her designer suit and pearls. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father began, his booming voice filling the $5 million room. "We are here today to ensure the continued legacy and stability of Sterling Holdings." While William was a visionary, his final months were unfortunately marked by confusion. Leaving a $5 billion empire to an inexperienced analyst is a fiduciary nightmare. I call for a vote to invoke Emergency Provision 15.3.2 and transfer executive control to myself as the sitting CFO. The room began to murmur in agreement. Several board members, longtime golf buddies of my father, were already nodding. This was their world, and they were ready to protect one of their own. I stood up slowly. "I object to this motion," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Every single head in that ballroom turned to look at me. My father's smile didn't just flicker, it vanished. "You have no standing here, Maya. You aren't even on the official agenda." "Actually," I replied, pulling the ironclad wool from my bag, Clause 7.3 gives me explicit legal standing. And I have something this board, and these shareholders, desperately need to see before a single vote is cast. At that exact moment, 6 senior auditors from PwC wheeled in massive boxes of evidence. Sarah Mitchell walked in behind them, her presence commanding absolute silence. "Mr. Chairman," Sarah addressed the head of the board, "I am Sarah Mitchell, senior partner at PwC. We have completed the forensic audit required by William Sterling's last will and testament. What we have uncovered during this investigation requires the immediate and undivided attention of this board and the authorities." My father tried to shout her down, calling it an ambush and a fabrication, but the chairman, a man who had known my grandfather for 40 years, slammed his gavel down. "Sit down, Robert. Let's hear what the professionals found." Sarah didn't waste a second. She connected her laptop to the ballroom's massive presentation system. The first slide appeared: Sterling Holdings Forensic Audit, Systematic Embezzlement 2010-2025. The room went so silent you could hear the air conditioning hum. Sarah began her clinical, devastating breakdown. She showed the money flows, bright red lines spiraling out from the company's core into my parents' secret offshore accounts. Over the last 15 years, Robert and Patricia Foster have authorized over $200 million in fraudulent transfers, she stated. Every single one of these transactions bears their personal executive signatures. My mother's face went a ghostly, translucent white. She reached for her phone, but her own lawyer placed a steadying hand on her arm and slowly shook his head. It was over. Sarah clicked through the evidence: the fake vendors, the Newark parking lot addresses, the consulting fees paid to my mother's shell companies. Then, she dropped the final, fatal bomb. She pulled up an email chain from 2019 from my father to his Cayman manager: "William is getting suspicious. Move everything to the secondary account immediately. Delete every trace from the Sterling servers. He can never know." The ballroom erupted into pure chaos. Board members were screaming for explanations. Shareholders were standing up in fury. Through it all, the 3 journalists were recording every single word, their fingers flying across their devices. My father, in a final, pathetic act of desperation, turned on my mother. I didn't know about all of Patricia's accounts. She was the one who handled the offshore contacts. "Robert," my mother shrieked, her society mask finally shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. Sarah Mitchell just smiled coldly and clicked one last time. "Actually, Mr. Foster, while you did change your signature pattern in 2020 to use DocuSign, we have a transfer from just last month, $800,000 to a shell company registered to your own brother-in-law." That brother-in-law, who was actually sitting in the gallery, stood up and sprinted for the exit without looking back. The chairman stood up, his face etched with a mix of grief and fury. "I am calling an immediate recess. Security, ensure that Robert and Patricia Foster do not leave this building under any circumstances. Someone call the SEC and the FBI. Now." My father collapsed into his chair, the color of his face shifting to a sickly, concerning shade of gray. After the recess, Marcus Coleman stood at the podium and read a final letter from Grandpa William, written just 1 week before he died. "I leave my legacy not to blood, but to integrity," it said. "Maya has the moral compass to restore what was stolen, not just the money, but the trust of our people." The board vote was taken immediately. 47 votes in favor of removing my father, 0 against. I was appointed as the interim CEO of Sterling Holdings on the spot. As security led my parents out of the service entrance to avoid the waiting press, my father tried one last, hollow manipulation. "Maya, please, we're family. Think about what this will do to us." I looked him dead in the eye, the same way I used to look at the chessboard. "Family doesn't steal from their own people, Dad. Family doesn't betray a dying man's life work. And family certainly doesn't throw their daughter out for having a conscience. You didn't just lose the company today. You lost everything." The aftermath was a total, scorched earth collapse of my parents' world. Within 2 hours, the story was the lead on the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. By the next morning, every asset they owned, the townhouse, the cars, the art, the jewelry, was frozen by the SEC for restitution. They were eventually forced to move into a tiny, one-bedroom walk-up in Queens, miles away from the life they had stolen. My father was banned from the financial industry for life, and my mother was stripped of every board position she had ever held. I, on the other hand, spent the next year stabilizing the empire. I implemented quarterly independent audits, created a whistleblower protection program, and established a $50 million foundation for corporate ethics in Grandpa's name. My first all-hands meeting with our 3,000 employees had a 97% approval rating. They finally had a leader who valued truth over optics. I still go to the penthouse every Sunday. I sit in Grandpa's study, looking out over the city he helped build. The chess set is still there, but now I'm the one playing the long game. I realized that the suitcase they let me leave with was actually the greatest gift they ever gave me. It was the moment I stopped being a backup plan and started being the master of my own destiny. Integrity isn't a word you put on a mission statement, it's the quiet choices you make when the world is trying to force you to be someone else. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to choose between what is easy and what is right, please share your experience in the comments. Your courage might just be the spark someone else needs to find their own power. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, your worth is non-negotiable. Stay strong.